On testing, people need to understand this issue because it's going to be determinative, and it's complicated, and it's been somewhat politicized, and now you hear different arguments about testing. Here are the simple facts on testing. And again, testing is something that no one would have expected as an issue, right? Testing we do in this country, and nobody really noticed. We have a whole system. It's a private sector system. And when you went to the hospital and the doctor said you have to have your child checked for this, so you have to be checked for this, you go to a lab, you have your blood tested. That was the testing system. No one ever imagined this testing system was going to become hyper relevant to survival and would need a capacity of 20, 30, 40, 50 times what the system was doing. So this came out of the blue in many ways. And it's one of the lessons we will learn. But for us, it came out of the blue. How does it work? You have national companies that are private manufacturers of laboratory equipment, and their piece of equipment can operate their test kits, okay? And there are a number of these private sector companies. And they make a machine, they sell that machine to labs, a network of labs all across the nation. We have about 211 labs in New York State. They buy these machines from these national companies, and they then have that machine. Sometimes they buy a number of machines from different manufacturers, and now they have a number of different machines. Some have higher output, some have lower output. But each one requires that you go back to that manufacturer to get a test kit and reagent that works for that manufacturer's machine, okay? So it gets very complicated quickly. There are different, what they call reagents, chemicals, that you need for each manufacturer's test kit and each manufacturer's machine. And the big labs will have bought a number of different machines from a number of different manufacturers, okay? So these are some of the big manufacturers, not all of them. You hear about Abbott, which has a new fast test. And these companies are all working to come up with these tests now, and who's faster and who's quicker, 1 hour test, 20-minute test, 15-minute test, 5-minute test. But every one of those manufacturers, you need to have their test kit and their reagents to operate on their machine. And you have some labs that have 5 or 6 different manufacturers' machines. When you go to the manufacturers and you say, I need you to increase capacity, many of the manufacturers are saying, I can't. I can't get enough reagents. I can't get enough swabs, these cotton swabs. I can't get enough vials. I just don't have enough material for my own test kits. That's the determiner of testing capacity, okay? And you're asking a system that, let's say normally did 1,000 tests. You're asking a system that did 1,000 tests, by the way, I need 50,000 tests. So they didn't anticipate this volume. And some of these manufacturers will say, look, I have a supply chain that is an international supply chain. I get my chemicals from China. I get my chemicals from here. So that ability to ramp up is what we're all struggling with. And every state is in charge of administering testing because the 200 labs in New York State are regulated by New York State. I regulate the 200 labs. It's only appropriate that the state should be in charge of actual testing in the state. I agree with the federal government's position on that. I have 200 labs. I should come up with a system that says how many tests in Buffalo, how many tests in Albany, how many tests in Manhattan, how many tests in Long Island. That's my business. I should be held responsible. I should be held responsible for making sure those 200 labs actually deploy across the state in a smart way. Hold me responsible. Where it gets hard is when the labs that I regulate say the manufacturers are the problem. And then I call the manufacturers, and the manufacturers say, I can't do it because it's an international problem. That's where we are now. Last night I get home. I have my 3 daughters with me now, which is a joy 99.9% of the time. We're sitting there, we're watching the news. Governor Larry Hogan comes on the news. Great guy, governor of Maryland, Republican, chairman of the NGA, National Governors Association, and vice chairman, so I work with the governor. And Governor Hogan says, I bought 500 test kits from South Korea. And there's a picture of Governor Hogan at the airport, South Korea airliner, and Governor Hogan says, I got 500 test kits from South Korea. And my daughter turns to me and looks at me and says, wow, that was really smart. And she just looks at me, doesn't say anything else. She didn't have to. I felt an immediate wave of guilt descend upon me. One of my other daughters, who was a little more pointed in life, a little more literal, said, why didn't you think of that, Dad? Why didn't you think of buying test kits from South Korea? So now I was really just feeling de minimis as a governor. Larry Hogan is a better governor. Why didn't I think of buying test kits from South Korea? Why didn't I think of buying test kits from Korea? Why didn't from China? It's not what states normally are responsible for. God bless Larry Hogan. He really thought outside the box and was very creative. But that piece is where the federal government can help us. Take that national manufacturer and that supply chain for the national manufacturers and let the federal government figure out South Korea and China and international supply issues. Rather than have 50 states now figure out how to go be like Governor Hogan and figure out how to buy tests in South Korea. That's where the federal government should help. And that's the intelligent distribution of responsibility on testing. So the federal government's right. The states should take the lead. Yes. Partnership, federal government, you have to help us with this national manufacturer and the supply list. After you do the testing, states have a second big task. Put together an army of tracers who then trace each person who tested positive, who did they contact, and then isolate those people who you contact.